Have you ever felt like you only exist when someone needs something from you? For the first 28 years of my life, I got used to that feeling. They needed someone to double-check the quarterly reports. I did it. They needed someone to stay late at the office to prep for a presentation. I did it. But the one time I asked a question about the shares I rightfully deserved, my father slapped me in the middle of a shareholders meeting. My mother just laughed. My sister clapped and said, "You deserved that?" I'm Amelia. Ever since I was little, I was constantly placed next to Sophia, my younger sister, the perfect princess with the dazzling smile and an endless stream of praise from our parents. "Amelia, why can't you be more like Sophia?" my mother used to ask, her voice sweet but sharp like a blade. My father was more blunt. "You don't have what it takes to carry on your grandfather's legacy." That legacy, the company my grandfather built from nothing, was something I poured my sweat and tears into protecting. And all I got in return were condescending looks and cutting remarks. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, if I worked hard, didn't complain, didn't make waves, then maybe, one day, they'd finally see me as a real part of the family. But I was wrong. Everything changed after one shareholders meeting. One simple question about the shares my grandfather left for me. The boardroom that day had marble floors. A chandelier blazed above us, casting shimmering patches of light on the walls like a film projection. But to me, it wasn't dazzling. It was cold. Cold enough to dry out my skin even though I had on a wool coat. My father stood at the podium, one hand on the mic like a president stepping out of a Forbes magazine cover. People clapped, calling him a leadership icon. My sister, Sophia, stood next to him in a floor-length gray silk dress, nodding and smiling at every introduction. And me. I stood off to the side, dressed neatly, but feeling like a foreigner among 50 shareholders in tailored suits. Whispers drifted past my ears, praises for my father and Sophia, talk of expansion plans, a brilliant future. A few eyes glanced at me, filled with either pity or indifference. "Amelia, what are you doing here?" one elderly shareholder asked, polite but ice-cold. I forced a smile, my hand gripping the engraved pen from my grandfather in my jacket pocket. I was here because I was family, but not the kind of family with a seat at the table. I was the kind of family they needed to be seen, to prove that this family was still united, still picture-perfect, still had all its children present. They just needed me to stand there, say nothing, ask nothing, and not ruin the carefully staged image already lit like a theater set. My father was talking about expanding into the Southeast Asian market, his voice brimming with pride. People clapped like he had just invented something new, instead of simply taking my grandfather's company and turning it into his personal stage. "Starting next month," he said, "Sophia will officially take over operations at the new Singapore branch. She's proven herself, not just with her degrees, but with her leadership and loyalty to this company." He turned to my sister and nodded. "All voting rights from my trust will temporarily be transferred to Sophia, so she has full authority during this restructuring phase." Another round of applause, louder this time, longer. I looked at him, then at my sister, Sophia, who nodded along in sync with every word he said. And I heard my heart beat. Not out of emotion, but fear. I hadn't planned to speak. I had told myself I'd just sit there, take notes and leave when the meeting ended. But my hands were shaking under my coat. And then I saw it. The ring my grandfather used to wear. The one he left to me, now on my sister's finger. I stood up. The entire room seemed to hold its breath for a second. "I have a question," I said, my voice slightly cracking, but I didn't stop. About the shares from grandfather. He said they would be split evenly between me and Sophia, but I reviewed the shareholder registry. My name isn't on it at all. My father froze. His face changed color, like I had just touched the most dangerous nerve in his body. Someone coughed quietly at the far end of the table. He said nothing, but my mother whispered to a nearby shareholder, her voice loud enough for me to hear. "Amelia's causing trouble again." Sophia looked up at me. Then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh. A real, loud, deliberate laugh. She said, "You think you deserve grandfather's shares? You're just a desk clerk, nothing more." All eyes turned to me. No one laughed. No one intervened. They just waited to see what would happen next. I swallowed the heat rising in my throat and replied, "I don't know if I deserve it, but half of it is mine." My voice trembled, but I stood tall. I didn't bow my head. My father stepped down from the podium, eyes blazing like I had just insulted the entire bloodline. He walked toward me, every footstep echoing across the marble floor like a warning. "What did you just say?" he growled, low and dangerous, sending a knot of dread into my stomach. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could get a word out, he raised his hand. The slap landed hard, so loud it drowned out the hum of the air conditioning. My face burned, my left ear rang, and the world tilted sideways. He slapped me, right in the middle of the meeting, in front of 50 shareholders, in front of the projector, the microphones, and every pair of watching eyes. Before I could react, he grabbed my hair and yanked. It was a familiar move, like he'd done it before, many times, just never with witnesses. He dragged me out of my chair, pulling me across the long table, past luxury suits and eyes that deliberately looked away. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I just tried not to trip as my feet scraped across the expensive meeting room carpet. The crowd was silent. 50 shareholders, the same ones who had once shaken my hand and smiled politely, now just stood there. Not a single one moved. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard my mother laugh, the laugh of someone who saw nothing wrong, or saw it, and enjoyed it. Sophia clapped. Her voice rang out, "You brought this on yourself, Amelia." That sentence cut deeper than my father's hand. The hallway outside the meeting room was cold, still, but not safe. My father let go of me just outside the door. I staggered, grabbing the wall to keep from falling. Blood from my lip dripped onto the dress I had carefully chosen to look like family. My head throbbed where he had pulled my hair. I didn't know what hurt more, the slap, the way he dragged me like a criminal, or the blank stares of 50 people in that room. Not one stood up. Not one said my name. And in that moment, I knew. I hadn't just been hit. I had been betrayed. By my family. By a whole room full of witnesses. Who chose silence. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I walked away, my legs heavy as if they were made of lead. I rushed into the building's restroom, the door slamming shut behind me with a thud that sounded like a declaration of war against myself. My heart was pounding, like it was trying to tear through my chest. Blood from my lip dripped onto the white porcelain sink, leaving uneven splashes of red. I looked up, straight into the cold mirror. A stranger stared back at me. The person in the mirror wasn't me. The right side of my face was swollen, the red spreading from my cheekbone to just under my ear. My hair was a mess. A few strands stuck to the dried blood at the corner of my mouth. And my eyes, red and swollen from tears, I didn't even remember shedding. "They were wrong," I whispered, my voice trembling but sharp. Wrong to think I'd stay silent forever. The sting in my cheek pulsed with every heartbeat. but it couldn't match the fire burning in my chest. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The screen lit up, casting a pale blue light onto my bruised face. My thumb slid through the contacts. Mark Peterson. I hesitated a second, then hit call. Mark used to be the company's chief accountant, honest, outspoken, and fired for not fitting in with the new executive culture. I knew the real reason. He refused to ignore shady transactions my father signed off on. I was the only one who defended him back then, and today I needed him more than ever. He picked up right away. His voice was low, concerned, like he could already sense something was wrong in the shakiness of mine. "Amelia, what's going on?" I tried to sound calm, but the cracks were in every word. I told him everything. The slap from my father, loud as thunder in that boardroom. The snickering laugh from my mother. Sophia clapping. And the silence from 50 shareholders. A wall of nothing pressing down on me. "They betrayed me, Mark," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "And I need to know the truth about my grandfather's shares." He paused for a moment, then spoke slowly, clearly. "I'll help you." I nearly broke down when I heard that. Not because I wanted pity, but because finally someone wasn't turning away. "I'll look into it. You stay safe, all right?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see, and ended the call. Sitting there in the cold restroom stall, I opened my contacts again and searched for Lisa, a friend from law school. I had helped Lisa cram during the final 2 months before the bar exam. She once promised she'd return the favor someday, and now, years later, she was one of the top attorneys in Austin. I had never called in that debt. Until now. "Lisa," I said when she picked up. Her voice was sleepy but snapped to alert as soon as she heard what I was saying. "Meet me tomorrow morning. We're going to make them pay," she said, her voice sharp as steel. Morning came too quickly. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's hand swinging, felt the burning pain on my scalp where he had grabbed my hair and dragged me. I showered, but the water couldn't wash away the humiliation. I put on jeans and an oversized sweater, the kind of clothes that made me feel small, invisible, then slipped on large sunglasses to cover the swelling on my face. My lip still throbbed with every movement, but I didn't care. I had somewhere to be. Downtown was unusually quiet for a Saturday morning. As I walked along the sidewalk, my heart pounded harder than it had the night before, like it was being pulled in 2 directions, between rage and fear. I had told Lisa I was ready. But was I? Really? When I reached the glass door of the law office, I paused, halted by my own reflection. A woman with a bruise on her face, chin tilted slightly upward, like she dared the world to come at her again. The receptionist barely glanced at me before pointing to the corner office. Lisa stood as I entered, crossing the room swiftly, like she had been waiting for this moment. "Amelia," she said, her voice low but steady, like a soldier gearing up for war. She hugged me gently, careful not to touch the bruise, then stepped back, looking me straight in the eye. "Are you ready to burn it all down?" "I burned it in my head all night," I answered softly, my eyes locked with hers. I sat in the leather chair across from her desk. Silence settled for a moment. Then Lisa spoke. "Tell me everything." I told her. Not just about last night. I told her about being 14, shoved into a wall by my father for talking back, and the sound of my mother laughing like it was a joke. I told her about holidays where I was forgotten, birthdays overshadowed by Sophia's achievements, about how my father's resentment began when grandfather started taking me to meetings instead of his own son, about how my mother humiliated me in front of family friends, calling my job a glorified errand girl. Lisa didn't take notes. She just listened, hands clasped, face unreadable. This wasn't the first time he's hit me, I admitted, my voice like smoke hanging in the air. But this time, there were 50 shareholders watching, and no one did a thing. She clenched her jaw. That changes everything. She leaned forward, voice calm but unwavering. We start with documents, a police report, medical records. We make this official. We're filing for misappropriation, illegal share transfers. And on the criminal side, I'll be submitting an assault complaint to the police. If they try to bury it, we go public with everything. There's a camera in that boardroom. Someone had to have recorded it. We'll find it. I blinked. Go public to who? To anyone who matters to them, Lisa replied without hesitation. Shareholders, business partners, their country club friends, anyone who cares about their perfect image. Her words felt like armor sliding over my skin. Amelia, she said quietly, you've lived in silence too long. It's time to live out loud. I nodded, my voice firm as I replied, let's do it. When I stepped out of her office, sunlight hit my face like a challenge. The city was louder now, car horns, hurried footsteps, life rushing forward. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was just drifting through my own life. They wanted me small. They wanted me silent. If they wanted silence, they shouldn't have broken me. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sky was pitch black, streetlights casting dim shadows through the window. My phone buzzed, an email from Mark. Check this, the subject line read. I opened it, my heart hammering at the sight of a thick attachment, over 30 pages long. Transaction records, power of attorney documents, wire transfer logs. I skimmed page after page, my eyes widening as the truth unraveled. My father and Sophia had funneled my inheritance, what grandfather promised would be shared equally, into a shell company, then rerouted it into Sophia's personal account. An email from my father to a shareholder pierced right through me. Make sure Sophia's shares are protected. Amelia doesn't need to know. The words, doesn't need to know, cut deeper than his slap. I remembered his voice at every dinner growing up. You should be grateful for what we give you. What had he ever given me? He had taken everything. I began snapping pictures of the documents, sending all of them to Lisa with a message. This is the proof. Then I turned to the mirror, the bathroom light still as harsh as before. I lifted my phone, took a photo of my face, the swollen cheek, the red bruise trailing to my jawline, the puffy, bloodshot eyes. Proof, I whispered, almost to myself. This wasn't just a wound on my face. This was the betrayal of an entire family. And for the first time, my rage had a shape. I couldn't let them bury me in silence ever again. 2 days had passed since I left Lisa's office, but the anger hadn't gone away. It had settled into something colder, sharper. My face still ached with a dull throb. Every chew, every attempt to smile was a reminder. Not that I had any reason to smile, but the bruise wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing that those 50 people in that boardroom had gone home and carried on with their lives, while I sat in my apartment trying to remember how to breathe. I returned to the old house, the place I used to call home, my hand gripping the doorknob like it might hold me back from the storm waiting inside. The house looked the same, pristine white fence, faint smell of floor cleaner drifting out the front door, all of it as fake as my mother's smile. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. My mother was already waiting, wrapped in a pastel sweater that made her look soft, harmless. Amelia, she said, her voice saccharine and false. Thank you for coming. Let's handle this within the family, okay? The living room was spotless. A fresh bouquet on the table, placed right next to an envelope and a black leather folder. Sophia leaned back on the sofa in another silk dress, just like the one from the meeting, her red-painted nails tapping lightly on her wine glass. "You should be grateful," she said without looking up. "You were invited into the boardroom, even though nobody needed you there." My father sat at the head of the table, eyes cold as steel, a stack of papers neatly arranged in front of him, a waiver of inheritance rights, along with a lump sum payment meant to buy my silence. Not a single person asked about the bruise on my face. Not one word. I stepped closer, my finger brushing the edge of the paper, feeling its cold smoothness. Then I saw it. A tiny voice recorder hidden behind the flower vase, its red light blinking like a watching eye. They wanted to trap me, wanted me to lose control so they'd have something to use against me. I slowly pulled my hand away from the papers. Deliberate. Intentional. I stood tall and looked my father in the eye. "I'm not signing," I said, each word sharp and clear. "And I'm going public with everything." My father slammed his hand on the table, hard enough to make the teacups rattle. But I was already walking out of that house, for the last time. I didn't look back. Outside, the cold air hit my face, but I felt lighter, like I had shed a weight I'd been carrying my whole life. The next morning, I called Jenna, an investigative journalist I'd known from Yale. I sent her the documents Mark had compiled, along with the video footage he recovered from the boardroom camera, undeniable evidence. I sent photos of my face, the swollen cheek, the split lip, and I wrote, "Tell this story. Leave nothing out." She replied with one sentence, "Done." They won't know what hit them. Just hours later, the article was live, and the headline sliced like a blade. "Company chairman assaults daughter, illegally seizes inheritance shares." The video spread across social media like wildfire. The moment my father slapped me, the footage of him yanking my hair, dragging me into the hallway like I was disposable. And Sophia, standing there, clapping, smirking. "You brought this on yourself." No edits, no blur, just the raw truth. I scrolled through hundreds of comments filled with outrage. "How can a father hit his own daughter like that?" someone wrote. "No amount of shares is worth more than your humanity," said another. I didn't reply to any of them. I just sat there in the dark, in front of my laptop, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee, heart pounding, but no longer from fear. It was the feeling of someone who had just set fire to the cage that held her for years. I whispered to myself, they wanted me silent. But now, the whole world is listening. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I blinked at the screen, heart pounding. Dozens of messages poured in, some from people I knew, others from strangers who had read the article. "Stay strong, Amelia," one message said. "You're brave for speaking out," said another. But then came the others, sharp as knives. "Liar. Gold digger. Rich girl gone insane." They had released something. I threw off the blanket, grabbed my laptop, and logged into every platform I could. And there it was, another video, edited and spliced from the shareholders meeting. They had cut out the part where my father slapped me, erased the footage of my sister clapping. They kept only the moment I stood up, voice slightly raised. Froze the frame right as I stepped toward the podium. The caption read, "Amelia loses control. Family tries to protect their reputation. She chooses to destroy it." The comments below were vicious, like needles stabbing into my skin. They weren't just fighting back. They were rewriting the truth. My phone lit up with Lisa's name. "I was just about to call you," she said as I answered, her voice sharp and deliberate. "They're suing you for defamation and filing for a gag order. They've hired Marcus Layton." My breath caught. Marcus Layton, the lawyer corporations bring in when they want to bury a scandal. Amelia, they're playing hard. I'm not afraid of him, I said, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. Lisa paused for a beat. Good, because you're not allowed to be. Before I could respond, the phone buzzed again. My mother. I answered, even though I knew I shouldn't. Amelia, she said, voice icy, not a trace of reconciliation. Mother, I replied, flat. You've destroyed this family, she hissed. You've ruined our reputation. Your father hasn't left his office. Sophia can't go to work. You should have stayed silent from the start. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, holding back the scream rising in my throat. Number, you laughed when he hit me. Don't talk to me about family. She exhaled, a sound sharp as a blade. You think this is about justice? In this family, you survive by knowing when to shut your mouth. Everything you have was given to you by your father. My throat tightened, but I didn't let her hear my tears. Number. What I have was given to me by my grandfather. He just took everything away from me, I said, and hung up before she could say another word. I stood there, staring at my reflection in the microwave door. Messy hair, fading bruise still visible on my face, but my eyes were no longer those of a girl begging for approval. They belonged to someone ready to fight. 3 weeks later, I stepped up the courthouse steps, feeling every stare, every camera flash, every whisper from the crowd. They weren't looking at me like the outcast anymore. They were looking at someone about to rewrite the story. Lisa walked beside me, calm as ever, while Mark followed close behind, carrying the thick binder we'd spent weeks preparing. Inside the courtroom, the air was cold and tense. My father was already there, sitting stiffly at the plaintiff's table, his expensive charcoal suit unable to mask the strain on his face. Sophia sat beside him, pale, her usual arrogance nowhere to be found. My mother sat at the back, motionless, lips pressed into a bloodless line. She didn't look at me, not once. Lisa leaned in and whispered, "Remember, they're the ones on defense now." The judge entered. Silence fell. My father's lawyer, Marcus Layton, stood with confidence. "Your Honor, my client has been defamed. His decades of reputation dragged through the mud by baseless accusations and a misleading video." I kept my expression still, but inside, my pulse roared. Misleading? He dared call my bruise, my hair being yanked, 50 witnesses? Misleading? Then, Lisa rose. Her voice was steel. "Your Honor, we have the full footage from the security camera. Unedited." She turned on the projector. The screen behind the judge lit up with the image of my father walking toward me. I trembled, not from fear, but because that moment was real. It wasn't being told in my words anymore. It was telling itself. The father, the slap, him grabbing my hair, dragging me out of the room, and at the edge of the frame, my sister clapping, clearly visible, her voice echoing from the podium mic. "You brought this on yourself." Lisa signaled to Mark, who stepped forward with the binder. She opened it, her voice steady and sharp. Bank statements, emails, wire transfers. This is the trail showing Mr. Whitmore, using his authority as chairman, redirected Amelia's inheritance shares into shell companies, and from there into his younger daughter Sophia's account. A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Sophia lowered her head, hands gripping the chair. My father didn't move, but I saw his jaw tighten. The judge frowned. Layton stammered, "This has no bearing on a defamation claim." "No," the judge interrupted, his tone firm. "It's very relevant. If these documents are accurate, the court must consider whether the plaintiff has engaged in criminal activity." And then it came, the sound I had been waiting for. I heard a whisper behind me. A shareholder leaned toward someone and said, I used to think he was an icon. Turns out he's just a bully with power. I looked at my father. His shoulders slumped, his chin dipped. Gone was the man who once stood at the podium like the world owed him its spotlight. My sister sat to his left, fingers clawing at her leather purse, lips bloodless. For the first time, they looked out of control. Soon after the hearing, my father was removed as chairman. The board didn't need to explain. The company lost 3 major contracts within the first week. My sister was forced to temporarily step back from managing her shares, while tax authorities and independent auditors launched investigations. I stood outside the courthouse, sunlight blazing down like a dare. Lisa gave a slight nod, signaling it was time. I stepped to the microphone and said just one sentence, clear enough for every mic to catch. I'm no longer the daughter they could overlook. This is my story, and I will tell it. The truth. I bowed my head. My fingers brushed against my neck, where my grandfather's old silver necklace swayed with every breath. It had once been torn apart, but I had mended it, link by link, just like I had mended myself. I moved into my new apartment on a morning that wasn't rainy, wasn't blindingly sunny, just the kind of light that felt like the sky itself was learning how to be gentle with me. The place wasn't big, but it had 2 things I'd never truly had before: silence and autonomy. The window opened onto a small balcony where I placed 2 pots of lavender, not because they were pretty, but because they were resilient. No matter the cold or the wind, they still bloomed. On the table sat the startup contract for my own company. White paper, black ink, not a single line signed out of pressure. The investment came from the shares I reclaimed. No loans, no handouts, no one's approval needed. I rested one hand on the contract. The other reached for my neck, where my grandfather's silver necklace swung gently beneath a soft sweater. It was no longer just a keepsake. It was a reminder that I am enough, even when no one's watching. I opened my laptop. The screen lit up with messages from strangers on social media. "Thank you for your courage, Amelia," one wrote. "You inspired me to speak up," said another. I read each line, my fingers gliding softly across the keyboard. And for the first time in years, I smiled, not to please anyone, not to hide the pain, but for myself. A smile light as breath, yet heavy with a lifetime of release. I poured myself a cup of ginger tea and opened the balcony door. A cool breeze drifted in, making the lavender tremble ever so slightly. No noise, no shouting, no hand reaching to control. I stood there and breathed, not thinking about my father, not thinking about my mother, not thinking about the day I was dragged out of a boardroom in front of 50 silent stares, just thinking about me, here, now. My family once tried to lock me inside silence. They built walls out of blame, out of slaps, out of contracts filled with numbers and conditions. But they forgot one thing. I didn't need to break down the wall. I just had to step out of it. I used to be the daughter they disregarded, the name left off the shareholder list, the silent witness to injustice. Now, I am the one rewriting my story, the one telling the truth, the one living, without bowing my head. The door to the past has closed. No need to lock it, because I know I'm not going back. I walk forward. Not because I've forgiven, but because I no longer need an apology. And if someone asks me what's left after all of this, I'll say, my voice, and a life that's finally mine. Have you ever broken your own silence? Share your story with me in the comments.